Viewpoint. I'm Dave Johnson. Cumberland Viewpoint is brought to you in part by the Putnam County Family YMCA, and it is a community service of Cookeville Communications. Good show for you today. As always, when Patrick Ryan is here, he is the president and founder of Ryan & Associates, an editorial consulting firm based in Cookeville, specializing in online global affairs, information resources, especially developments in the Middle East and Asia. The firm, established in 1999 in Washington, D.C., brings together writers, researchers, web design and development specialists, and other professionals to deliver customized editorial solutions to an international client list. He is also the president of the Tennessee World Affairs Council. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thanks, Dave. Glad to be here.
Should say welcome back. You've become a regular, and I appreciate your time and your willingness to come on and share your insights with us on world affairs. As always, more going on than we can cover in 30 minutes. It always goes really fast.
It does seem to just fly by whenever we start.
I should also mention that you are a retired Navy intelligence officer. How many years?
26.
26 years in the Navy, and retired in what year?
98.
1998. And
seems like just yesterday.
Does it?
The Navy has changed a little bit in the last 14 years.
16 years seems to go by pretty fast anymore.
Yeah, 16 years.
So you've been out for 16 years, retired as a commander?
Lieutenant Commander.
Lieutenant Commander, same as my dad. In fact, we were swapping stories before the show started here. We believe it's possible that our paths crossed in Rota, Spain, where my father was stationed when I was in high school, and where I went to high school on the naval base in Rota, Spain, and you went through Rota in 1974.
Right, I was a submariner back then on one of the ballistic missile submarines based in Rota.
And you were a submariner for the entire time you were in the Navy?
No,
You eventually went into intelligence.
I was an enlisted submariner. I was a chief petty officer, and then I got a commission after going to night school, getting my degree done, and became a commissioned officer, and eventually moved into the intel community.
Now, you enlisted to be a submariner.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me that. This was something you asked to do.
Well, I was originally in the nuclear power program, but I spent a year in Bahrain in the Persian Gulf, and then I was in submarines.
So this was by choice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Submarines, the community has always been volunteer service within the Navy, and it remains so.
Really? So they don't just assign people?
No, you have to volunteer.
And wouldn't that be an indication right there that you might be a little bit, a few sandwiches shy of a picnic?
Well, they
sounds like a trap to me.
Submariners like to think of themselves as a sort of an elite force.
Well, are they not? Of course they are.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm claustrophobic, so the idea of spending 60, 70, however many, 90 days or more in that big tube underwater without coming up for what? Very rarely, if at all, is.
Yeah, once you go out and submerge, you're usually not coming back up until the end of your mission.
Did you ever get claustrophobic?
No.
It's a big area in there. I mean,
it's pretty tight. You get used to it. I can remember after I got commissioned, I was on a guided missile cruiser, and we were in Diego Garcia and went aboard a submarine. One of my shipmates asked for me to help him get a tour, so we went down on an attack submarine, the same class that I had been on, and it seemed like they had shrunk them since I had been on board. So you get used to it, and then if you've been away a while, it seems a little odd.
So you never really got the discomfort of.
No, not so much. You kind of you wish that particular patrol was over and you were back home, but as far as the day-to-day environment, you stay too busy to think about it.
Did you ever count up the number of total days you spent underwater as a submariner?
I'd say it's probably around about 3 or 4 years underwater.
I'm just processing that. That's not dead air, folks. It's just me trying to imagine 3 to 4 years.
But I didn't do a full career as a submariner. There are guys out there who have, 15 years underwater.
Wow.
You know, some of the occupational specialties their rotation. They're on sea duty more than shore duty, so they're spending a lot of time on the boats.
You got some good stories to tell about submarining?
Yeah, and I've got a few stories, but I'd have to kill you if
You'd have to catch me first.
It was back, the Cold War days, doing all the Tom Clancy kinds of things.
What's one of the better stories that you can tell? What's something that happened that sticks out that might give people a sense of what it's like to be a submariner, spending so much time underwater, that kind of assignment?
Oh,
and it may not be something that necessarily happened when you were out to sea.
Well, most of the good stories are when you pull in for liberty. We were in the Mediterranean in 1974, and we pulled into this little island, Corfu, Greece, and we were supposed to be in there with an aircraft carrier, the Forrestal, but the tensions in Cyprus that year were starting to build up, so they kept the aircraft carrier at sea, and we went in there. It was 100 guys, and here's this resort island expecting 5,000 sailors, and there was only 100 of us, so we had a pretty good time in Corfu, and then we got underway, and the war broke out in Cyprus in '74, and we spent a lot of time involved. Back in those days, the Soviet submarines and surface ships in the Mediterranean were of primary interest to us, so our submarines and ships were engaged with keeping track of those guys.
What's the biggest danger in a submarine when you're out at sea and you're submerged? And what's the most dangerous situation
you're in a 300 feet long steel pipe with a nuclear reactor and nuclear weapons, and
you can't just pull over and get some roadside assistance.
No, you've got a number of things that could happen: flooding or fire or.
Any of that ever happen while you were? Did you ever have any close calls?
We've had some small fires, and in fact, the U.S. Navy has lost 2 nuclear-powered submarines back in the '60s, the Thresher and the Scorpion,
but not since.
Not since, and the Navy learned a lot from losing those 2 boats and the crews. They developed some safety systems as a result. A lot of the lessons of the Navy are learned in blood, and that was the case with the Thresher. We learned a lot about submarine engineering that to this day have kept submarines pretty safe.
What would be a typical tour underwater? How long?
Well, we have 2 different kinds of submarines. The ballistic missile submarines, which go on patrol, they're the strategic deterrent. They carry intercontinental ballistic missiles that deter attacks against the country, and they typically have 2 crews because they keep the ship at sea as long as they can without wearing out the crew, and they may go on patrol 60 to 70, 75 days. It's probably changed now, but it was about 70, 75 days when I was a submariner.
2.5 months.
Right. And we also have attack submarines, which deploy like regular surface ships. They may go to the Western Pacific or the Mediterranean, where they operate with our aircraft carriers and other ships, and they're probably at sea for 3 or 4 weeks, and then they'll pull into a port. They'll have liberty for the crew, and then the ship will go back out.
Were you on the attack or the other?
I've been on both. I was on the George C. Marshall, which was a ballistic missile submarine, and the Pargo, which was an attack submarine. And then I did 4 years in Naples, Italy at the submarine staff, Subgroup 8. And as a staff member, I would embark on the attack submarines that deployed to the 6th Fleet.
When were you in Naples?
76 to 80.
What was Naples like? What was that? How would you describe Naples, Italy? I've heard my dad talk about it.
That was great fun. I really enjoyed it.
You mean when you weren't underwater?
Well, yeah, it was a staff job, and I started going to night school. That's how I got most of my undergraduate degree done, and then the Navy sent me to finish my college and get a commission. But that's where I met my wonderful wife, Connie, who's from Gainsborough, and eventually that tells the story.
That's how a Brooklyn boy meets a Gainsborough girl. And
that's how you wind up in Cookeville. Yep.
And she was in the Navy too?
She served in the Navy as well. Right.
And so you got out in 1980. What year?
Well, we left Naples in 80, but I continued until 98. After I got commissioned, I did 16 years as an officer.
Do you miss it at all?
Sometimes I do, and sometimes I enjoy being home every night. The Navy is kind of tough on families.
We're talking with Patrick Ryan. He is the president of the Tennessee World Affairs Council, and also the president and founder of Ryan and Associates, an editorial consulting firm based in Cookeville, but You spend a lot of time traveling around. In fact, you just returned from a trip to Washington and New York. Fact-finding, I assume, going to more meetings?
Meetings and doing some interviews. My business deals mostly with Middle East affairs. We do a lot of work in the Persian Gulf. I go to the Gulf now and then, and Washington every month or so.
Now, as a naval intelligence officer, through the years immediately following the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union until now, you have a perspective on our relationship with Russia that is probably more informed than most people. This situation with Putin and Crimea and now Ukraine, do you have an assessment on that? What's your general opinion about what Putin's intentions are? I've heard that he is posturing himself as taking control of Ukraine only so that he can pull out and look like a good guy, and then take the Crimea beach along with him.
Right.
Keep that, but leave Ukraine alone. And I've heard other Russian history experts say the same thing, that they don't think that he's going to try to do much more than what he's already done. What do you think about that analysis?
I hadn't heard that he's going to try to look like a good guy. I'm not sure he's worried about his image in the West, and I don't think he can restore a positive image. So I'm not quite sure about that scenario. But I would say that Putin has made statements over the years that he saw the demise of the Soviet Union as the worst calamity of the century.
Well, he's an old KGB guy, right?
Yeah, he was a colonel in the KGB, and his perspective is East-West rivalry. And I think he sees a restoration of the Soviet Empire or the Russian Empire, rather as a goal, strategic goal of the Russian Federation.
Meaning bringing back under the umbrella of the old Soviet Union and all those satellite countries that are now no longer part of that?
There are two components of what comprised the Soviet threat during the Cold War. One was the actual Soviet Union, which included independent nations like the Ukraine and Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, the Central Asian Republic.
Czechoslovakia.
The Czechoslovakia, which is now the Czech Republic and Slovakia, divided into two countries. Those were independent countries, but they were part of the Warsaw Pact.
Right.
So they participated with the Soviet Union in the East-West split.
The former Yugoslavia.
Same with East Germany, and as opposed to West Germany, and Poland was in the Warsaw Pact. The Baltic states, they were dominated by the Soviets. Mm-hmm. So those are now independent countries, and many of them are actually members of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which
also is Ukraine.
No, Ukraine is not a NATO member. They participate in a partnership program, but they're not a full-up member of NATO.
Okay.
But countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, the Baltic republics, Hungary.
Now, the Ukraine is part of the European Union. Am I mistaken there, too?
They're not yet in the Union. The reason all this current problems stem from a divide within Ukraine society of whether to be Western-looking or Eastern-looking.
And do you think that the majority of Ukrainians do want to come back under the control of Russia as Putin is trying to make it look?
No, we saw several months ago there were the riots in Kiev, and there was a harsh crackdown, a lot of bloodshed.
Those are being fomented by troops that Putin is sending in there.
No, this was when there was a Russian-leaning president of the country.
Oh, right. They ran him out.
Right. He departed. Right. There was a new government installed. The demonstration stopped, and
I guess I'm talking about since then.
Yeah, there's a split within Ukrainian society of Western-looking, and obviously in the western part of Ukraine that reaches out to Europe, and the eastern part of Ukraine, and what is Crimea, now annexed by Russia, which is more Eastern-looking, which looks towards Moscow for leadership.
Now, strategically, this is an important country, isn't it?
Oh, you bet.
It borders Turkey, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, if you look at the map of Europe, there's you wouldn't quite call it a bottleneck, but in Central Europe, there are two countries that, if you put them together, they reach from the Baltic down to the Black Sea, and that's Ukraine and Poland.
Right.
So if you dominate those two countries, you control the width of Europe, and Ukraine is an important country. It serves as the conduit for a lot of energy supplies from the east to the west, which is one of the reasons the European Union is a little more reluctant to do some of the more aggressive sanctions and take actions against Russia in response to their annexation of Crimea. It also serves as, during the Soviet times, it was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union because they have a lot of agricultural resources there, and Russia looks to Ukraine as part of its buffer with the West, and it's a key strategic land. And you know, the Ukrainians still can recall the starvation that they suffered during years of famine that were induced by policies during the years of Stalin and the Soviet Union.
We are talking with Pat Ryan, the president of the Tennessee World Affairs Council, and also president and founder of Ryan & Associates, an editorial consulting firm based in Cookeville specializing in online global affairs information resources. And just to sort of follow up on this, do you think Putin is going to stop short of invading and trying to take complete control of the Ukraine? And why should Americans care? And how does this affect our, let's say, America's place in the world in terms as a power broker, as having any influence and control? What is our role here, and why should Americans care?
Well, the playbook seems to be to use militias within Ukraine without sending in Russian troops to take over buildings and to foment unrest in parts of the east. That's what they did in Crimea. There were Russian militias. There were apparently some troops that were flown in and backed up the troops that were at the Black Sea Fleet.
A lot of
headquarters.
Mercenaries that I think are referred to as Cossacks, using a
couple
centuries old.
Those guys showed up too, but there were Russian troops that didn't have discernible markings of their units.
On purpose.
In some inane way, they thought they would disguise who they were and where they came from, but they were clearly Russian troops. Russia has had its Black Sea Fleet headquarters in Crimea, and that was the outlet to the Mediterranean, which they considered to be a strategic asset. So the playbook has apparently been to use local militias to foment unrest, and then to threaten that if Ukraine or other people put down Russian-speaking people's interests in those areas, there would be consequences. And the consequences were backed up by mobilization of troops along the border.
And so, is he going to stop short? What do you think? What's your prediction? Do you know?
I think he'll continue to foment unrest and to press the Kiev government to some sorts of accommodation. I don't know that there'll be an outright invasion or an annexation of eastern Ukraine, but it looks like he will play every card he has to keep the Ukrainian government off balance.
So, what is America's place in the world in this particular instance? And in a greater context, I hear this being said a lot in conversations, and it seems to be sort of just a throwaway remark that many people make in the midst of a conversation that is probably over their heads to some extent. Usually indicates to me that they're probably a little bit out of their league in terms of what's being discussed when they throw this out and they say, why do we have to be the police of the world? We're not the police of the world. Why do we have to be that? And that seems to be a common phrase that I hear quite a bit. Can you take that? Well, further?
You know, that's been a sentiment in American public life for quite a long time. You know, after World War I, there was a retrenchment. America became very isolationist. They rejected Woodrow Wilson's move to establish international bodies to try to keep the peace and we saw what happened after the interwar period. We wound up in World War II.
Well, there's a lot of paranoia out there about a one world government, and that all
yeah, there's that too. But American isolationism is nothing new. It runs in cycles, and I think people are weary of having fought 2 wars over the last 10 years that seem to never end. One thing I would mention, if I could, the aspect of the Tennessee World Affairs Council that we started here in Cookeville and we continue to run. We are working hard to bring programs to the community so people understand some of these issues and why it's important to know what's going on in the world. And right now we're asking for support in the community. The First Tennessee Bank Foundation has a grant program currently running that we're eligible for, having received a grant from them in the past to send students to Washington for international competitions and to run what's called World Quest around the state, including Cookeville High School students. And if people are interested in supporting that kind of thing, all they need to do is to go to 150daysofgiving.com, and if they vote for the Tennessee World Affairs Council, we'll receive some grant money that will help support the programs we run with students and in the community. That's 150daysofgiving.com, and that will help us bring in the programs and resources. We do things like public events with ambassadors. We've had the ambassador from Kazakhstan and the Czech Republic talking about the former Cold War adversaries. We've had those 2 ambassadors here in Cookeville to talk to high school students out of Cookeville High School and the Rotary clubs and to shed some light on these issues. So we hope it's serving a public community need, and we appreciate if people can visit 150daysofgiving.com and vote for the Tennessee World Affairs Council. They can do that for every day, probably for the next 100 days. We're about 50 days into the program, and every day the First Tennessee Bank is picking another winner for the grant.
Is this a contest against other organizations?
There are a number of organizations that have received grants from First Tennessee Bank in the past, and we've been in the happy position of receiving some of their generosity to support the student programs that we've run in the past. So we're eligible along with many other nonprofit organizations. That's the key. People who are in the nonprofit community. I guess you'd call it a contest. We're looking for people to vote for our organization so we can continue to do the global awareness education that we've been doing since 2007 here.
So is there a threshold of votes, or is it per vote? How does that work?
Well, everybody can go online to 150daysofgiving.com, and they will find us by just searching for World Affairs. And
Tennessee World Affairs Council,
right,
is what you're looking for.
Or spell the whole thing out, and they just hit the vote button. And you can vote as many times as you'd like per device. So if you have an iPhone, you can vote on that. If you have a PC or a Mac or a tablet, you can vote.
So you can only vote once per device?
Once per device per day.
Oh, every day?
Every day. Go back in and hit vote under Tennessee World Affairs Council. And
the more votes you get, the more money they donate? Or?
Every day they pick one of the organizations as a winner, and then you're good to go. And we hope that within the next 100 days we'll earn enough votes from the community to support what we're doing.
So go to www.150daysofgiving.com, and that's all one word. The number's 150daysofgiving.com, all one word, and vote for the Tennessee World Affairs Council so that they can continue to offer the great programs that they offer to help people understand the world affairs and geographic considerations of world politics. It's complicated, and without a good geographic context that you can understand things through, it's really difficult to put everything in order and understand. It's so complicated.
I think it's complicated is a good way to describe it. But we'd also like to thank the terrific support of the First Tennessee Bank Foundation, not just to the Tennessee World Affairs Council, but to all the organizations that are being helped by the program they're running.
First Tennessee Bank Foundation offering this opportunity. So go to www.150daysofgiving.com and vote for the Tennessee World Affairs Council. Now,
we appreciate the plug. Thanks,
Dave.
Dave.
We will do it again before the show's over here. If you didn't catch it the first time, be ready with a pencil or a pen. You were discussing a Pew Research study that observes the public seeing U.S. power declining as support for global engagement slips. What is your interpretation of that analysis?
The Pew Center for Research occasionally will survey the American public on this key question, and along with they're conducting surveys all the time. But they recently published a poll on the views of U.S. global power, and they indicate that the country overall sees, and it's a 40-year low in the responses to questions on the U.S. role as a world leader. Back in 1974, 39% of Americans thought that America was more important now at that point than it had been 10 years earlier, and 28% thought the reverse, that the United States was less important and powerful than it had been 10 years earlier. And over time, those numbers have remained in the range of about 35 to 40% of people thinking America's position in the world was one of exercising global power. So it was kind of stunning in the last two surveys to see the numbers tick up, and most recently the number has been 53% of Americans now think that the United States is less important and powerful than it was 10 years ago. And only 17% believe the reverse, that we're more important and powerful than 10 years ago. So this is kind of a remarkable change in what had been a steady trend. And a lot of people chalk it up to the 10 years of war that Americans have been involved in, and if you look at Iraq, for example, the result is probably less than satisfying when we see what's still happening there after the years of blood and treasure that America spent there.
Right, and situations like Benghazi and all the publicity that gets. How many times has this been investigated?
I think some of the public perception is probably, and this is reflected in the poll, perhaps in some way. I think a lot of it goes back to what we see as partisanship and gridlock, and the government not seeing eye to eye on a lot of issues going on. So there's disenchantment with the government role in foreign policy, and a lot of the partisan bickering.
Do you think that perhaps winds up affecting people's understanding of our
sure.
power
I think there's a lot of demagoguery when it comes to foreign affairs. It used to be that the phrase politics ends at the water's edge, and that foreign policy was reserved to be, both sides of the aisle should be on the same sheet of music when it came to America's interests around the world, and that's becoming increasingly difficult situation in Washington.
So Benghazi has become a political football that both parties are throwing around.
I think that's probably a totem word that can be used to express the problems between Republicans and Democrats on getting something done in the international sphere.
We are out of time, and it's been a pleasure talking with you. As always, Pat Ryan, President of Tennessee World Affairs Council. Once again, support their efforts to broaden people's understanding of world politics, conditions all over the planet, by going to 150daysofgiving.com and vote. You can vote every day on every device you have once, and help them earn the grant that First Tennessee Bank Foundation is offering to help them out. Again, it's www.150daysofgiving.com. That's all one word, the numbers 150, and then daysofgiving.com. And vote every day if you can, and vote on all of your devices at one time. Each day is what you're allowed, and you'll help to guarantee that they'll get that grant. And Pat Ryan, as always, really a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks, Dave.
And the perspective that you bring us, and we'll have to do it again real soon here.
Appreciate it.